When I was about 9 or 10, I was invited with my classmates to a birthday party. All of us, same age. It was a small class of about 20 kids, and I'm pretty sure everyone was invited. Just to clarify, I'm a boy. Anyway, I kinda got separated from everyone, and it was just me and this girl, alone. I wasn't particularly close friends with her, but I did know her, as she was in my class. To describe the location we were in, it was a tunnel that was connected to the main wave pool and lazy river. There wasn't really anyone else there, just me and her, when she suddenly lunged at me without warning. She grabbed me by my head and held me under the water. I was a pretty skinny kid, and she was bigger than me and a bit of a tomboy. About 20 seconds went by and I furiously tried to free myself, but she wasn't letting go. Fight or flight and mass panic took over, and I eventually fought my way free. I was coughing and sputtering out water as I emerged. I remember looking at her and just being in shock. I think I began to ask why she did that to me, and that's when she lunged at me again. She again held my head underwater for what felt like a lifetime before I fought my way free. Both times, I generally thought I was going to drown, and she didn't let me up. I had to fight my way free. I couldn't swim at this time, but the water in the lazy river and tunnel was just maybe chest high. I began to backpedal away from her. She was giggling as if it was funny, and had this kind of crazed look and grin on her face. I couldn't just climb out and escape, as it was a tunnel, so I had to try to get out of there. As I was backpedaling, she was following me, and I made sure to keep my distance so she couldn't lunge at me again, but she was gaining on me. I actually managed to reason with her, as I was so scared of her, I was babbling at her. I tried to distract her by suggesting we go down the water slide together. It worked, as I could see her thinking about it, and she stopped chasing me. I managed to exit the water and the tunnel, and she slowly followed me, but seemed a bit unsure. I immediately felt more safe out of the water and could see other people about as we headed towards the slides. I kept talking all the way up, how fun the slides were, etc. But she didn't really speak at all, and had this really strange look on her face the whole time. Anyway, after we went down the slide, I caught up with my friend, and just stuck with them for the rest of the time, as I was a bit shook up. I never told them about it, as it was a bit embarrassing to admit that a girl had tried to drown me, and was worried about getting teased. Anyway, fast forward into adulthood. This girl turned out to be a lesbian. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But she got with her partner, who had 2 or 3 kids from her previous relationship with a guy. Turns out that they would torture the kids, and eventually killed one of them. She is currently serving a life sentence in prison. I told my friends about the swimming pool incident after hearing about her crimes, and I'm pretty sure they think I'm bullshitting, as none of them took me seriously. Maybe, as I kinda lightheartedly said, that I was almost victim 1. However, nonetheless, it's a bit crazy to think back, as she was obviously a genuine psychopath, and if I had never fought her off and escaped and convinced her to go down the slide, I genuinely believe she could have killed me. My sister Bianca and I are 4 years apart, and I have the blessing of being able to have the most attentive and protective big sister, as she always had a remarkable sixth sense. I was 7 years old, 1st or 2nd grade. My sister in 5th grade, age 11. We lived in a small town in the South Bay area of California, 45 minutes south of San Jose. It was an extremely hot day, but we walked our usual 8 blocks from elementary school to our home. Just some info regarding my mom. She worked nights stocking at our local Safeway most of my adolescent life, so we were very independent, got up and got ready for school on our own, etc. My mom slept until 3:30 p.m., then got up, cleaned, made dinner, then got to work about 9 p.m. I mention this more for background on the type of childhood I had. It was a different time during the 90s. Every day we stayed after school for about an hour with our favorite kindergarten teacher. My siblings and I, all the same blessing of having the same kindergarten teacher, that we developed a super close relationship with her. We enjoyed helping her clean up and prepare for her morning class every day. She would usually drive us home, but couldn't that afternoon, due to staying later than usual to wait for her husband James to pick her up and take her to the mechanic to pick up her car. This meant my sister and I were going to be the only kids walking home at this time. We didn't care because of all the attention this wonderful teacher gave us. In the 90s, the area behind our house was undeveloped and was a good 3 blocks long by 1.5 block wide, directly in front of the newly placed skate park. So from my backyard gate, we could see the park. Upon passing the park, we would run from the sidewalk that borders the park to the back door of our fence, which was my favorite because my sister always let me feel like I was the winner. About halfway through the run, I'm ahead as I mentioned before, and as I'm passing through the normal sticker bushes, everything is dirt and ugly tall weeds that would poke you badly if you got too close. Some of the bushes you could hide under, but it was so ugly that we usually raced to avoid the stickers. So I'm literally 100 yards away from the fence when I hear my sister scream my name. Like, not a normal scream, but she shouts my first and middle name really sharply, and I stop dead in my tracks. I yell backwards, "What?" Right before I turn around and can fully see what's going on, she pummels into me. She's grabbing my shoulder while wrapping her arms to shield my face from what I'm sure I'll be scared of. She's doing this all while shoving me forward, and I'm so confused. There was no time to say anything, but from the break between her fingers, I could see 2 sets of legs under a large bush, and this is where my memory plays like I'm watching a movie, and I can rewind every detail. I have spent many hours with my sister recalling details that I blacked out, but scared myself that I can't vividly recall. So, I witnessed an assault. They are laying under the larger bush with both sets of legs exposed. I see a man dressed in a red tank top with blue dirty jeans and black boots. He has sunglasses on. He was very agitated looking. He was choking this younger woman. She was probably barely 20, wearing overalls, a white shirt, and white sandals. Her face was very dirty, bruised, and lips blue, scratching his hands and moaning. This is all I get to see, obviously more than enough, before my sister yanks me in an alternate way. She said that she was afraid he would follow us or see us unlock our gate to our house, so she took me around the long way. I was so scared, sobbing, asking her, "Sissy, what was that? That guy was killing her." My sister said, "No, Mama, let's go. Hurry. We can tell Mom, hurry up." All I see is a blur until we get home and wake up my mom, hysterically telling her what we saw. She called the police, but we never got any information regarding if they found her. I've scoured the internet for anything about an assault, kidnapping, and I have never heard or seen anything. My sister cried when I asked her recently about this memory, thinking it was something I had a nightmare about. But the detail I recalled made her scared that it severely traumatized me. It's scary in any context. So man who was attacking that poor girl one day after school, I hope you reap what you sow, and we never meet again. In 2017, I had heard news of people dressing up as clowns and running around with knives at night. I typically brush those things off because I've got my own problems. I, at the time, 20 female, was often up all hours of the night dealing with my screaming newborn. It was January or February, so we still had some snow, and I wasn't able to get out of the house a lot often. Taking out the trash, which was located right next to our back door, was usually the most I got of fresh air. One morning I took out the trash and happened to glance over to the right, and it was footprints directly under the window to my baby's room. I walked over to inspect it, and not only were there footprints, but there was also hand indentations on my window screen. Weird, but my baby slept in my room, so not very concerned at the moment. but my boyfriend was losing his marbles. Fast forward a couple days, and I wake up around 3 a.m. and heard not exactly what I would call screaming, but more like a screeching howl. We have a lot of stray cats, so I kind of thought that's what it was, and just ignored it. Once the sun was up, I looked out the window, and I noticed a few sets of footprints. That really didn't make any sense because it kind of looked like someone had just been passing in between the house. But again, I blew it off because we had a drug house across the street, and we had people go through our yard all the time to get to the house. Maybe 4 nights later, again, at 3 a.m., I'm breastfeeding and I hear dragging noises against the house from where I was sitting on the couch. I can see the back door. The back door has a window with blinds on it, and it doesn't seal well due to the wood rot on the frame. I paused the TV and just listened, just to hear it again now directly at the back door. Looking over, I can clearly see a looming figure just standing by the window. He's holding one of those big kitchen knives, and granted the blinds were shut, so I'm seeing the creepy shadow versions of this. He runs a knife across the window pane before softly knocking. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what to do with my newborn latched on because my phone was in the bedroom and something in me doesn't want whoever's out there out of my vision. So I stand up and readjust because I really don't want a screaming baby right then, and walk into my kitchen and flick on the lights and said, just loud enough for him to hear me, "Hey man, I already called the police, and I'm sure you don't want to deal with them, so why don't you just go home?" I don't know why I talked to him so calmly and normal like that, but I don't think he was expecting anyone to say anything, because he froze the moment I began talking. He talked it over with himself for a minute, and then darted off towards the alleyway. Never had anything like this happen again, but my boyfriend sure was mad I didn't wake him up to handle the situation or at least actually call the police. Not sure if this counts as a creepy encounter, but I sure was creeped out once my sleep-deprived self realized what happened. The people in the story are me, a family of 4 consisting of a mother, father, toddler, and a baby. And of course, our guest of honor, the creep. Context: I am a 17-year-old female. I was born and raised in Canada with a pretty sheltered life as my mother was very overprotective. I read a lot on the subreddit, so I am in no way naive or unaware of how to deal with a threat. But up until this post, I had never dealt with harassment before. For the summer, I am visiting my godmother in Italy. This is my first time leaving Canada. Since she works during the weekdays, I travel about on my own around Italy. For the story, I took a ferry to Ischia, a small island in Nepal. When I first arrived at the island, I made a plan to head to a small scenic park not too far from the port, so I can plan my day. It was around 3 p.m. when I was in the park. Now the park itself made its way into a semi-forested area. The pathway was covered with trees and bushes alike, so it was easy to get lost in there, at least for me. It was also pretty desolate at the time and gone from the public eye. I was sitting on a bench next to a playground for children, decked out with swings and slides. There was a family a little away from me playing at the playground. The playground resides in a little circle-like clearing in the park. On opposite sides of the clearing are pathways that take you around the park. The paths have trees that make a tunnel-like path, so it can be harder to see down unless you are directly in front of it. Where I was sitting on the bench, which was near the north pathway, I could see directly down to the south pathway. Now, I was sitting on a bench for a while, mind you, as Italy is pretty hot and I'm not used to the heat. My head was looking down at my phone, so I wasn't exactly paying attention to the outside world, but I would look up periodically to watch the family play. It was now around 4 p.m., which is nearing when I was going to leave to catch the ferry back. As I'm about to pack up, I look up from my phone to see this guy standing in the path across from me, the south pathway. Now, I wear glasses. My eyesight isn't that good, so I couldn't really make out what this guy was standing there for at first glance. I also didn't want him to know that I had an eye on him, so I tried to get a better look from my peripherals. After a minute of watching this guy and trying to figure out why he was staring at me, I came to a horrifying conclusion. To put it lightly, this guy was jacking off in public while watching me. It was light out and literally a fucking family not 10 feet away from me. This was the first time I've ever experienced anything like this, so I was scared shitless. Let me make it clear, I look like a teenager. I have acne and a baby face, so it's very clear I'm underage. As I was sitting there panicking about what to do, I see the guy moving side to side on the path to get a better look at me. The creep looked so unassuming, with some gray basketball shorts and a black graphic tee with a balding head. From what I could tell, he was around his early 30s. I don't speak much Italian, and with how frazzled I was from all this, I could not utter a cohesive sentence. After sitting on the bench for another minute trying to calm down and think clearly, I pull out my translator app and type a message that translates to Italian. Now, not to alert this creep out that I knew what he was doing, I stood up casually and began to make my way to the mother of the family, who was with her young baby at the time. The father and toddler were gone off a little further into the trees as I could not see them. While shaking with nerves, I approached the mother, hold up my phone with a message on it without a word. Now, from where the mother was, you could not see down the path, so she was none the wiser to what was happening. My translated message went along the lines of, "Hello, sorry I don't speak much Italian, but I'm in need of help. There's a creepy guy on the path that's watching me, and I'm scared." Now I know I probably should have made my situation more clear in the message, but I was freaking out and didn't know how well my English would translate into Italian, so I kept it short. After the mother read the message, she got a concerned look on her face and asked me to show her where the guy was. We walked 5 feet over to where the path begins to find the fucker is gone. I assume he saw me walking towards the mother. Thankfully, I came to find out that the mother speaks a little English, so I was able to communicate roughly what the creep was doing. And since she was with a baby, I didn't want her to go after the creep, but she was mad enough to attempt. Eventually, she told me that her husband would be back soon, and he spoke more fluently. Once he came back, I re-explained what happened, and asked him if I could follow them out of the park to a public area, so I would not be left alone and vulnerable. While they were packing up their belongings, I called my godmother, and gave her a brief rundown of the situation, and that I would be making my way back on the ferry. Now, I'd love to say that this tale ends without any more troubles, but sadly that's not how it went. After me and the family left the playground area and made our way down the opposite path from where the creep was to where I assume was the exit of the park and the main road. While walking, the mother tries to comfort me, assuring me that the guy wouldn't follow me as he left as soon as he got a clue that I caught on. I thought differently as I could see this guy clearly from where I was sitting, and he wasn't subtle about the staring. After walking a bit more on the path to the exit, I spot a familiar-looking man walking back to the playground. Once I made eye contact with him, I immediately knew it was a creep from before, walking casually like nothing was wrong. Once he spotted me walking with the family, he quickly made a turn onto a path that diverged from the main one. This creep was circling back to find me, assuming I stayed at the playground or was walking alone to the exit. I lean over to the mother and quickly tell her that it was the same guy. Unfortunately, the path that the guy took to avoid us was the same one we needed to take to get to the exit. This dumb fucking creep cornered himself without any way to leave except to pass by us. The father at this point had the baby in his arms, and the toddler was following closely behind him. The mother enraged followed shortly after the creep, cussing him out in a mix of English, Italian, and Spanish. As I came to find out that they were visiting from Mexico. The creep walked sheepishly off, with his head tucked pretending he couldn't hear the lady yelling behind him. Finally, after the angry mother stopped following the man, we made it to the exit of the park. I thanked them profusely and bid my farewells and made my way down to the port. That family saved me from a dangerous situation, and I could not be more thankful for their comfort and protection. I often think what could have happened if I was left at that park on my own, knowing that this guy would have circled back for me. So for my first sexual harassment experience, I give it a rating of -1 out of 5 stars. Wouldn't recommend. So to the creepy guy in the park, let's not meet ever again. This happened last holiday season. It was my first Christmas with my partner, so we were hanging out and telling each other our personal and family traditions so we could do them together. I brought up hot cocoa and peppermint schnapps, and he said he never had it before. It's hands down one of my favorite parts of the winter, so I excitedly said that we had to go try it and offered to go down the street to the liquor store for a small bottle of schnapps. The liquor store is less than a mile from the house and has an overhang parking spot near the door, like where you park when checking into a hotel. I was just running in quickly, so I parked there. As I get out of the car, I notice a homeless man going through the dumpster about 100 feet away. I didn't think much of it. It's a low California desert, and unfortunately, homelessness is very common. I grab my schnapps and go to walk out of the store, but as I turned to go to my car, I saw the homeless man suddenly start speed walking right towards me. I was maybe 10 feet away from my car, but at this point, so was he. I freaked out and bolted to the driver's side door, and he does the same. I jumped in as quickly as I could, slamming the door as he was getting to it, but my purse stopped it from closing all the way. I felt the door partially latched though, so I hit the button and locked the doors and quickly pulled it the rest of the way closed, just as the man started pulling out the door. He was right by my window, so close that I could see his eyes bulging in the dark. He started trying to say something to me. I kept yelling no as I started the car and was able to get away. I haven't gone back to the liquor store since. I just don't want to ever meet him again. The story happened when I was in high school. It was the end of lunch break, and I was hurrying to class. I didn't really pay attention to my surroundings, and I was speed walking, so I didn't notice a student who was running across the hallway, and they ended up running into me. I fell down on my lower back. The fall was pretty painful, so I went to the school nurse. I rested there for a bit, and started to feel better after an hour or so. The nurse called my dad, and he decided to take me to the hospital. I told him that I thought he was overreacting, and that I would be fine, but he insisted on coming to pick me up at school. The hospital he drove me to was the children's hospital, so I was annoyed about being treated like a child. I wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. After waiting a bit, my dad and I entered the doctor's office. There were 2 nurses, a doctor, me and my dad in the room. I don't remember the details very well, but I think they needed to inspect the area of impact to decide if I needed to do an X-ray scan or not. The doctors took me to a semi-closed off part of the room for an inspection. It wasn't a separate room, but it had a small wall so my dad and the nurses couldn't see us. It was my only direct interaction with this doctor, and it already felt like something was off when he stepped aside. He told me to lie down facing down, so I did that. And then the first weird thing that he did was push my clothes and underwear aside so he could inspect. I didn't overthink it too much when it happened. It was kind of weird that he didn't let me do it, but then he just started inspecting me and it went normal for about 30 seconds. Then he told me really quietly something like, "This would be so much more fun if we were doing this to each other." I was so choked up that I didn't know what to say. I just gave a short answer that would end the situation as soon as possible. And then the inspection ended. The doctor didn't say anything else, and I went back to living my life. I think about this whole thing sometimes, and what really bothers me is that I'll never have closure. I'm pretty sure I heard him correctly, but I really hope I misunderstood him, or that he misspoke or something. If I did hear him correctly, however, that could mean it was so much worse than what I experienced. This man worked, maybe still works, at a children's hospital. Maybe this is something he did regularly with his patients, and maybe it was something more than just saying fucked up things. Maybe he even did fucked up things. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name, and I couldn't find any documents from my visit to the hospital that day, so I probably will never know. At the end of the day, I really hope I misheard him, or that he no longer works there and face consequences for his actions, if he is an actual child predator. For context, I'm a French female, 22, but this happened when I was 17 years old. I live in the northeast part of France in a small town. That day, my class and I were going to go to Paris for the movie selection project, so we left early in the morning since our city was far from Paris, around 2-hour train back and forth. So we came back late in the evening around 7 p.m. It was winter and the sun was fading away sooner. I was with my cousin, 17 female, on the train station of the main town. We said goodbye to everyone and headed outside. I am a smoker, so after being stuck on the train for 2 hours, I needed my nicotine shot. I lit one cigarette at the entrance of the train station as soon as I was outside. There's a big place in front of the station, surrounded by bars and restaurants on one side, and on the other side, a big building. This place is crowded all day and all night, so as usual, it's busy. People on the terrace, people commuting, going in and out of the station, and the spot for the homeless people. It was dark and snowing. After my first inhale, a guy came out of nowhere. I'm petite and small, and at the time super skinny, and this was a big man, like really large. So I get spooked by the sudden apparition. He was around 30 years old, wearing a raincoat. He had this blank face, this dark blank stare. But what struck me the most were these frozen tears running down his cheeks. I could still see these frozen tears. He was so disconnected. He looked down at me, told me that he was a homeless man, asking for money and asking for a cigarette. It was not something unusual. Here homeless people were always asking for money and cigarettes. But something was off about this man. I told him I didn't have any money and it was my last cigarette. Yeah, I lied. This big man shouted the same speech. I'm a homeless man. I have nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. Please can you help me? I need some money and please can you give me a cigarette? I jumped, terrified, glancing at my cousin who was also frightened. My instincts were on high alert. I just took the cigarette out of my lips and gave it to him. Took my cousin's arm and got us quickly out of the situation. I didn't turn back and paced to the trainway station where my cousin's dad would pick us up. When we arrived, the big man was not there. He did not follow us. He was standing at the entrance in the same position. I was relieved. We decided to wait on the benches. We talked about how uncomfortable and how weird it was. As we were talking about Paris and our plans for the night, since I was sleeping at her house, I lit another cigarette since I didn't get to enjoy the first one. We got interrupted by another homeless man. We paused and looked at him. He was smaller than the previous guy. He was obviously drunk or on something. He was so happy. He was talking to himself and to the people around. Then he stopped and glared at me. He smiled and came towards us. He said drunkenly, "Hi, beauty." And then he made nonsensical discourse about the weather, how pretty and hot I am, and the joy of alcohol. We didn't say anything, just glared at him and ignored him. He started saying some insults and arrived in front of us. He shouted, "Hey, you bitch, are you deaf? I'm talking to you." I looked around. There were a few people, but they just ignored us. I don't know what happened, but survival mode was activated. I just started to speak to him in English. I don't know why English, but anyway. He was so delighted, he said in a mix of French and English. He started to ask me and my friend where I was from, why I was here, and switched into perfect French about how sexy I am, how lovely blonde girls are. I played my part and pretended not to understand all the obscenities he was saying in French. I pretended to be from England and that my name was Elizabeth. I was here to see my cousin and just continued to play along. It seemed to distract him a lot. He was stumbling. He became really close to me. I just stood up slowly went backwards while still speaking English about my fake life. He was looking at my breast most of the time. He asked me in French if I wanted to have sex and other things like that. I tried to shift his focus by changing the subject, and it somehow calmed him down. My cousin and I were uncomfortable and scared. She checked out her phone to see how far her dad was. He arrived 5 minutes later. I was still talking to this pervert. I rushed with my cousin and said goodbye. He looked at me and said in French, "I'm going to join you in England, Elizabeth. I will look for you." I was so disgusted by his words, it sounded like a threat. As we drove away, I stared at the reflection and saw him waving and smirking. My cousin looked at me and said, "I don't know why you played along, but thank you for keeping a poker face and distracting him. He was so unsettling." I told the story to my friend's family, saying it was a dangerous place for two young women at night. Stories of young women harassed at the train station were in the newspaper all the time. I don't know if I behaved in the right way and if I was paranoid, but I'm glad no physical assaults occurred.
For about 4 years, I worked for a buffet-style diner that was open until around 10 p.m. But closing at 10 meant that we usually left at around 11:30 or later. The job was not glamorous. I was a back-end worker, so I mostly just did the dishes and some of the prep work, which at a buffet is an absolutely ludicrous amount of work. Being that I did a lot of the back-end cleaning, I was also assigned trash, meaning that I had to pull all the bags of trash from the front and back, and then take them to the dumpster out back. Again, not glamorous. Nothing that I would consider an entertaining job, but it was a job that paid okay, so I did it to the best of my ability. One night, around 11 p.m., I was doing my standard routine. I bundled up all the trash bags, got all the bins emptied, and headed out the back door of the restaurant to take the first load of bags to the dumpster. As I was heading back in to grab the second load of bags, I noticed that a pickup truck was pulling into the lot slowly. I didn't pay it much mind, mostly because I was busy and really didn't care. I went back in and grabbed more bags, went outside and tossed them into the dumpster. When I turned back to head back in and get the rest of the trash, I heard a voice shout out, "Hey!" I paused, thinking that there was no way they were possibly talking to me. But then they shouted, "Hey, you, come here." As I turned and looked over at the truck, the guy opened the door and stepped out, just kind of standing there waving me over. Again, I just stood there and stared at this guy. He looked like a linebacker. He was covered in tattoos, with what looked like a gnarly scar on his face. I would say that if I had seen this guy in a movie, he would be playing that part of mafia enforcer, if that makes sense. The guy again motioned for me to come over to him, which removed any doubt about whether he was talking to me or not. I cautiously approached him, maintaining a bit of a distance. He then asked me, "Hey, are you Frank?" His voice was cold, and it honestly sent chills down my spine. But I am not Frank. Far from it. My name is David. And for the first time in my life, I was glad that my name was David. I shook my head and told that guy that I wasn't Frank. And for some reason I even said, "Oh, no, sorry. My name is David." As if me and this threatening man were going to become close friends. Without missing a beat, he cut me off and said, "Well, if you don't want to end up skinned and dumped in the river, I highly recommend you go back inside. And, don't come back outside for a while." His tone was flat, matter of fact, and like he was simply explaining something to me. I stood there for a second and kind of stared at him. I had heard what he said, but it took me several seconds for the words to actually register. I mean, who says something like that? Of course, the look in his eyes was dead serious, which kind of set me into motion. In a bit of a daze, I nodded and said, "Right, yeah, okay." The whole way back into the restaurant, I expected to feel this guy grab me, or a knife to get stabbed in my back or something, but it didn't happen. I went back inside, and I decided that my last load of trash could wait for a little while. After I got back inside and did my dishes and finished up my other duties, I started thinking about things and realized that I didn't work with anyone named Frank. There was no one in the building named Frank. So, who was that guy looking for? I even asked my shift lead if anyone worked there named Frank, and she told me that there were no employees with that name. I told her that I was approached by someone out back that was looking for a Frank, leaving out the threatening to be skinned part, and she told me that it was probably just a drug deal, and to forget that it happened. Which, thanks, that helped quite a bit. Anyways, I never saw that guy again, and thankfully I don't work that job anymore. The fact that I did work there for 4 years is crazy, and I do have some other stories that I may send your way at some point, but for now, I think this is the best one to put out there. I hope that the mystery man was able to find Frank, or I guess depending on his motives that he didn't find Frank. Either way, thanks to him for scaring the hell out of me that night. So, this story is from a chapter in my life that I honestly kind of wish I could erase. But since I can't, why not share it with the world? This was back in a quieter period of my life, where I was still kind of finding myself. But I was starting to put the pieces together. I had a pretty decent job, I'd finished my degree, I was making a decent amount of money, and all was well. At this point, I was even in a relationship with a young woman that we're going to call Rachel. Now, to set the record straight, she and I were not in a serious, life-consuming kind of relationship. It was casual, comfortable, and enjoyable, but completely casual. We'd been together for about 3 months, and we were exclusive with each other, but we'd both agreed that there was likely nothing in the future for us. We had different plans, specifically when it came to kids and our careers, and we were just enjoying the time together until something inevitably split us up. Basically, good while it lasted, but not irreplaceable. And, of course, that something that split us up would come from my side of things. One day, my boss called me into his office. I honestly thought I was about to get fired, but it was actually the exact opposite. He offered me a huge promotion and asked me to oversee the team at our newest office. The only thing was, this office was in Salt Lake City, which is a bit far from my home in Virginia. He basically told me that this was a once-in-a-lifetime job offer, and that this was a massive career move, and that I should seriously consider it. And, if I took it, I would be living in SLC in about 60 days. When I told Rachel, we both talked about it and understood what this meant for us. It was agreed that I would take the job and that we would go ahead and just end our relationship then and there. There was some regret, a bit of crying, but at the same time we knew that this was for the best. We gradually stopped talking to each other over the next month, and while it was sad, it wasn't really devastating to either of us. Fast forward to around day 45 of 60, and things took a bit of an unexpected turn at work. My manager informed me that there was a bit of an administrative issue, and my new position in Salt Lake City would be delayed a bit more. There was no specific timeline, just that I would have to wait longer, and they 100% promised that I still had the position. I was okay with it. It gave me a bit more time to prep for the move. They were offering to compensate me for the extra rent that I was paying, having to go month to month with my leasing company, and honestly, it made me feel way more relaxed about everything. Then, the day finally arrived. The day that I was supposed to leave for Utah. I was home, sorting through my stuff and boxing up a few things, not hurrying in any definition of the word, when I get a phone call. Much to my surprise, it was a phone call from Rachel. I kind of smirked, thinking that she was calling to wish me happy travels or something like that, which was super sweet of her. But then I answered, and, well, it wasn't that. She started the call off with a frantic, "Hey, Jackson." Her voice had a tone of, I guess, worry or concern, like she was a bit scared or nervous. I said hello and asked how she was doing, and she cut me off with, "Hey, I'm at SLC International. I need you to come and get me." My mind took a moment to register what she had just said. I asked her why she was in Salt Lake City. She responded with, "I decided that I'm moving in with you. I brought all my stuff, and my cat. I need you to come get me ASAP." Now, remember, I hadn't spoken to Rachel in a few weeks by this point. She had no idea about the delay, or that I was still sitting pretty in my little apartment in Virginia. I broke the news to her, telling her that I wasn't in Utah, that I was still at my apartment because my work had delayed the move. I expected her to be upset or whatever, but she responded in a way that I never would have expected. She lost it, screaming at me over the phone, accusing me of lying, of deceiving her, and blaming me for her being stranded in an unknown city. She was hysterical, crying one minute, yelling so loud that the phone clipped out the next. I tried to calm her down, telling her that I was sorry and asking why she didn't call me before she packed up and flew out. And she responded by screaming, "It was supposed to be a surprise." Which, yeah, I was surprised. But who packs up and flies to a city halfway across the country with plans to move in with someone without even telling them? After a bit more yelling and sobbing, she slowed down on her emotional roller coaster and the call went silent. She cleared her throat, and when she spoke again, her voice was chillingly calm. She simply said, "The minute you land at this airport, I'm going to kill you," and hung up. I just sat there on my bed with my eyes wide and thinking, wow, that was not the Rachel that I knew. I tried to call her back to see if we could figure something out, but she'd either turned off her phone or blocked my number. She didn't call me back. She never texted me back. I even tried calling her mom to see if she knew what was going on, and she had no idea where Rachel was, or that she had even flown to Utah. A few more months went by, and in a bit of a twist, my work decided to not move me out to Utah. My boss here in Virginia was actually chosen to lead the team out there, and I was given his position here locally. So I ended up never having to actually move at all. Since that day, I have not heard from Rachel at all. I haven't seen her here in town, I haven't gotten a text or call from her, and her Facebook has not been updated. I literally have no idea what happened to her. I sometimes do wonder about it, how she managed in a city that she'd never been to, and I hope that she's doing okay. But it was such a bizarre event that I can't help but feel a bit freaked out. Sure, I do feel a bit guilty because it all could have been avoided had I told her about the delay, but I didn't see a point, since I was still going to be moving out there at the time. It was just going to be a bit later. Plus, she could have called me and told me that she wanted to make the relationship serious, because I probably would have gone with it. Though, now that I've written all this out and kind of thought about how she was acting, maybe it's best things ended up the way that they did. I have a strange but scary situation that happened to me back whenever I was 13. My parents both worked, and I didn't have an older sibling or any nearby family, so I was left home alone. A lot. I know that's not the best parenting, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they did the best with what they had. If they could have afforded someone to watch me, I know that they would have done so. I wasn't a bad kid. I would just stay home and watch TV or play my PlayStation. And normally there weren't any issues. On this day, the sun was setting, lighting up the living room through the side window, and making me feel like I was about to doze off while I ate my pizza rolls and watched some late afternoon cartoons. In the middle of me starting to close my eyes, I was jolted awake by a loud pop. I shot up from the couch, throwing my plate of pizza rolls on the floor. The sound was like a balloon bursting or a firecracker, but 100 times louder. Looking around the room, I couldn't see anything amiss. The window was intact. The outlet hadn't burst into flames. Nothing like that. I glanced out the window to see if someone was out there, but I didn't see anybody. I started picking up my pizza rolls and blowing them off to get the carpet bits off of them. I was 13, so I was still going to eat them. As I was picking them up, listening to the sound of the TV and waiting to see if anything else happened, I jumped again at the sound of the doorbell ringing. I froze, but then it rang again, and I figured that I should do something. I shouted, "Who is it?" as I walked over to the door and reached for the knob. I heard a voice say something on the other side, but I couldn't tell what he said. All I could tell was that he was out of breath. I pulled the door open slightly, thinking that if I didn't open it all the way, whoever it was couldn't get to me. I asked him who he was and what it was that he wanted. The man on the other side of the door was a large and quite burly guy, sweating heavily, and his face was a bright red. His voice was weak, almost like he was trying to not let anybody hear him. He asked, "Are your parents home, kid?" I should have lied, but in my nervousness I blurted out, "Oh, no, they're not home. They will be soon, though." I still don't know why I told this guy that, but I did. But then the man spoke again after taking a deep breath. Alright. Could you call 911 for me, son? I've been shot." Wait, what? My eyes widened in shock. He moved his hand slightly, and sure enough, I saw the red stain on his shirt. He wasn't kidding. This wasn't some kind of joke or anything. He had been shot. Without another word, I dashed back into the house, fumbled with the phone, and dialed 911. The operator picked up and asked me where the emergency was, and I never knew how stressful calling 911 actually was. As I explained the situation, I could hear the disbelief in the operator's voice, but she assured me that help was on the way. The man staggered over to our porch and dropped down, sitting heavily against the side of the house. I think those sirens were the most comforting sound that I have ever heard. Paramedics rushed to the man. applying pressure to his wound and loading him onto a stretcher, and they were gone as quickly as they showed up. Obviously, the cops showed up too, and my parents came home in the middle of the chaos, returning home with a sense of terror, I'm sure. The cops were kind, but their questions were a bit pointed. I repeated my story again and again. The pop, the man, the blood. Eventually, my parents took over, and I was left to sit on the couch, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving me feeling hollow and a bit shaky. A few days later, we got the news that the man had survived, thanks in part to my call. I felt pretty good about myself when the officer told me that I had probably saved that man's life. That pride was a bit short-lived, though. I was actually somewhat terrified to stay home alone, and my parents weren't willing to leave me there. I'm pretty sure that we all had a bit of PTSD. Me from the whole situation, and them from coming home to a bunch of cops stationed outside their house. I was honestly okay with them not being willing to let me stay home anymore. To be completely honest, I feel like this event made me grow up a bit quicker than I should have. I didn't really feel like a hero, though they told me I had done a good thing. I felt scared and vulnerable, and like my home wasn't the safe haven I'd once thought it was. It's one thing to see someone get shot in a movie. It's another thing to see a gunshot wound within a couple feet of your face. I had some nightmares about the whole thing for a while, and I had this weird fear that I was going to wake up to one of my parents being shot. Something that obviously never happened, but still weighed heavy on my mind. I know that all sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true. I was a bit too young to be thinking about my mortality. But if someone could shoot someone like that in my neighborhood, what was to stop them from doing it again? Would I get shot while walking to my friend's house? Being confronted with those kinds of things that early in your teens, it kind of changes you. And while I'm now an adult and have never been faced with anything like that since, seeing that man hold his stomach like that is a visual that I will never forget. I have a short but pretty terrifying event that happened to me about 4 years ago. I had just moved into my new apartment, and it wasn't in the greatest part of town. It wasn't like it was riddled with crime and scary to be in. It was just an area that was a bit lower income, really. The best way to describe it is somewhere in between pretty decent and a tad sketchy, if that literally makes any sense. I will mention that I am not white, and while I don't like to play the race card for anything, I'm pretty certain that this had something to do with the situation that played out. Like I said, I had just moved into a new apartment, and it was actually my second night living there. I was watching TV and I had this idea that I should go buy some ice cream to celebrate moving in. You have to treat yourself every once in a while, right? Just celebrate those little milestones and everything. It was a brisk night walk to the store, quiet and peaceful. Little did I know that the trip back was going to be the complete opposite of the walk there. I walked back on the same path that I took to get to the store, except this time I was carrying a bag with a tub of rocky road. A bit into the walk, I noticed a group of 3 guys standing up ahead. At first, I thought they were just some guys out enjoying the evening like I was, until they turned toward me and started walking. I tried to avoid being paranoid, thinking it was just good timing, and that they were just randomly heading in my direction. It became pretty quickly apparent that they weren't just heading in my direction, they had intentions. They very quickly stopped me and had me backed up against a wall. Initially, I thought this was a mugging. I told them that I didn't want any trouble, and I put my hands up, basically saying, "Take what you want to take. I won't fight back." Mostly because it was three guys, at least one of them with a gun, and me armed with nothing but a container of Rocky Road ice cream. I assumed that they would take my wallet, probably my cell phone, and maybe even my ice cream, and that they would just run off and that would be that. But, of course, it was actually much worse than that. The leader, I'm assuming, or at least the guy with the gun, barked at me to drop the bag. I did. He then told me to get down on my knees, and, well, I did what he asked. He told the other two guys to pat me down, which was weird, but I wasn't going to question the guy that literally had my life in his hands. They patted me down, and one of them said that I was clear, whatever that meant. But then it got even weirder. One of the other two grabbed my hands and pulled them behind my back and then cuffed me. My mind immediately went to, are these some kind of rogue police officers? I actually summoned the courage to ask them why I was being arrested, and the leader just told me to shut up. No more than a couple of seconds later, the area was lit with flashing red and blues as a car pulled up to the scene. The car parked, and I heard a stern voice shout, "What the hell is going on here?" The guys responded in a manner that was far from scared or concerned. The one just saying something along the lines of, "Don't worry, Sheriff, we got him taken care of." Apparently this was the wrong thing to say to the sheriff, as he lost it. He told all three of them to get on the ground and immediately called in for backup. The three guys started yelling at the sheriff about how they were helping and how I was one of them. Again, whoever them was, and saying that they were helping him. The sheriff told them they were a bunch of idiots and yelled that the one guy needed to drop his weapon and they all needed to get on the ground right then. The whole time I'm just sitting there on the ground, hands behind my back, thinking, I really chose a bad night to get ice cream. When the other officers arrived, they swiftly handled the faux cops while the sheriff uncuffed me and asked if I was all right. I told him that I had no idea what was going on, and he confessed that he was just as baffled as I was. He told me the obvious and mentioned that those guys were not cops, and he was clearly just as confused about their endgame as I was. He offered to take me back to my apartment, and when we got there, he took my statement. He promised me that he would see to it that those guys would face the consequences of their actions, and then followed that up by suggesting, with genuine concern, that it may be safer for me to avoid late-night strolls in the area. With the guys' comments of me being one of them, and the way he said that, it told me all I needed to know. I told him that I understood. He offered me his business card and then told me to call him if I ever had any trouble. I was shaken, of course, but at least I knew that someone out there was looking out for me in this crazy part of town. Looking back, that night could have gone much worse. If the sheriff hadn't pulled up right when he had, I can only imagine what those guys were going to do or what their next step was. I was completely defenseless. And honestly, if that guy had wanted me dead, I think that I would have been dead. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and I'm grateful that the timing was on my side. While I have had to deal with people like them a few times since that night, it's never been anything that terrifying or life-threatening. I still live in the same apartment, and thankfully most of my neighbors are friendly. I will say that this lovely welcoming party did go away for some pretty serious crimes. And of course, the guy with the gun was a felon, so he shouldn't have had the weapon in the first place. Also, when I go to the store now, I drive. No more late-night walks to get my Rocky Road. I used to work the late shift for a drugstore that was open until 1 in the morning, and I hated every second of it. It was not a fun job, but it paid my bills and kept me fed, so despite disliking it, I did it for several years. My duties were super simple: run the register, help the customers, stock the shelves. Nothing too crazy. Well, minus the photo desk. We all hated the photo desk. One night, I was sitting behind my register helping people check out and yawning every 3 or 4 minutes because I was tired as all get out. I remember my manager Phil came over to me and told me that he needed me for a second, which was never a good thing. Phil was a gruff guy, super monotone and emotionless, but he was an okay manager. Usually, when he said he needed to talk to someone, it was to reprimand them, and I assumed he was going to get on to me for yawning or something, but he didn't. He pointed toward the wall mirrors where we could see a young woman standing. She was small, probably not even 5 foot, and thinner than what I would say is healthy. I watched her in the mirrors and noticed that something definitely seemed off. She was a bit too twitchy, if that makes sense. He made a comment about keeping an eye on her because he had a bad feeling. I tried to act casual as I watched her, glancing over at her, sneaking quick looks to see if I could catch her doing something. She seemed incredibly nervous, and was darting around to different aisles, seemingly at random, doing her best to keep her back to us. Phil was definitely right. Something was up. A few minutes later, the woman made her way over to my register, holding nothing more than a 2-liter of Pepsi. I stared at the soda and then looked at her. Her hair was wiry and her eyes looked nothing short of empty. She had very dark circles around them. She looked more tired than I did. Before I finished ringing up her one item, Phil walked out of one of the aisles and approached the woman with his arms crossed. He said, "Hey, I saw you put that makeup in your pocket. You need to either pay for it or leave it on the counter." I remember that his voice was loud, and it echoed, which is probably the most emotive I had literally ever seen Phil. Instantly, things turned from mundane to absolute chaos. The woman shook her head no at him aggressively. Phil reached his arm out to grab her bag. Admittedly, this is something that we were told not to do, but Phil was my manager, and I wasn't going to tell him to stop. As soon as he reached his arm out, this woman lunged at him and sank her teeth straight into his forearm. Phil screamed in pain and surprise, trying to pull his arm back, but she kept her grip on him for several more seconds. She then released him, let out what I can only call a bone-chilling screech, and bolted out the door into the darkness. Phil staggered back, clutching his now bleeding arm and staring at me like, what the hell was that? It was a gruesome sight. He was bleeding really bad, and you could clearly see the imprint of her teeth. I remember that I started feeling nauseous while staring at him. I called 911 immediately. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone. The paramedics arrived in only a few minutes, and they rushed over to Phil to wrap his arm to stop the bleeding, and they said that they needed to get him checked out and tested because there was a chance that she could have given him a disease. The police also arrived, asking me what happened. I almost wanted to tell them that Phil was bitten by patient zero and that we were about to witness the damn zombie apocalypse. That's how surreal it all felt. Honestly, who expects a woman to bite someone over some stolen drugstore makeup? They took a look around, made some notes, asked about camera footage and all that, but I think they were as baffled as I was about this whole thing. Phil ended up needing stitches to patch his arm up, and I'm sure they had to give him a rabies shot too, just in case. Poor guy was incredibly shaken up about the whole incident, but can you blame him? After that night, he was a lot nicer to people, which I guess is the silver lining to having your arm ripped into by some crazy woman. And me, I was left with a creepy story and a new disdain for the night shift. Oh, and I avoided the cosmetic aisle at all costs, just in case. And though I've moved on from that job, the memory of that night, the visual of her latching onto him, and that horrifying screech that she let out before running away, it all still sends major shivers down my spine.